Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Girls Who Fought Crime, the untold true story of the country's first female investigator and her crime-fighting squad, by Major General Mary K. Eder, narrated by Elizabeth Wiley. Whatever you choose to do, leave tracks. And that means don't do just for yourself, because in the end, it's not going to be fully satisfying. I think you will want to leave the world a little better for your having lived. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Introduction. I stepped into the massive packing box of an elevator with the tick of the closing door ratcheting my heart rate up a notch. At first there was a heady mix of the import of the moment and a hint of excitement. It was the first time I'd been to One World Trade Center on yet another clear September day, now nearly 20 years since 9/11 and the attack on the Twin Towers. The second tick came from just a hint of fear. I'm not a fan of high-rise elevators, and the ride from the ground floor up to One World Observatory promised to be fast and dizzying. It took just 47 seconds to shoot up to the 102nd floor. The building is a symbolic 1,776 1776 feet high and 104 stories in total. Even so, the ride was enthralling, and I didn't even have a moment to think about the high-rise ride. I was too absorbed in the incredible story unfolding in front of me. The video walls of the elevator tell the full story of the growth of New York City in those 47 seconds, graphically playing out the city's rise out of the earth along the river to seeing buildings rise higher and higher, tighter and closer. Traffic increases from horses to motorcycles and automobiles, then cars, buses, and a million honking taxis, while planes appear, become increasingly sophisticated, and begin marking the sky with crossing white lines of their trails. I turned around and around, trying hard not to blink. I held my breath as the years flew by in mere seconds. The Twin Towers came and went. Then, ding, the doors opened, and the intoxicating expanse of New York in all its glory, past, present, and future, was laid out in front of us. In every brilliant direction there lay history, a million stories, and a future to behold. The spirit of New York is the story of America. Immigration, industry, invention, crime, punishment, education, development, and pride. All those human endeavors that made the years fly by in 47 seconds. Mary Mae Foley lived through perhaps just a brief flash of that fast film drama playing out on the elevator's walls. She was the daughter of immigrants, born on the cusp of the 20th century, her life story a part of the quintessential dynamic of New York and America itself. It was still Victorian times when May came of age. Women wore long skirts and carried parasols on the streets. They couldn't even vote yet. But May knew what she wanted. Making a difference was part of her plan. She was barely out of high school when she began to work for the city. Soon she found herself juggling husband and kids while she fought to form the first female auxiliary police force in New York City, galvanizing 2,000 women to join her reserves. After the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, May continued to challenge the patriarchal status quo, becoming one of the first sworn officers with the New York Police Department, NYPD, and working a variety of assignments that ranged far afield from her beginnings in social welfare. Arriving on the force from a background in social work and limited experience as a volunteer in the Women's Police Reserve, she was among the first to join the force as a young wife and mother. Once a sworn officer, Mae served first with the newly minted Masher Squad. There she brought down robbers and would-be rapists, then became a detective, investigating the notorious 3X murders, and provided witness protection during the trials of two of the deadliest mafia bosses in the city. She faced down criminals with guns more often than not, and always came out on top. Before and during World War II, she worked undercover, infiltrating the American Nazi movement in New York. She also investigated potential acts of enemy espionage and sabotage across the city. Her skills in investigation, detection, and jujitsu made her the perfect crime fighter, close-mouthed intelligence officer, and dedicated public servant. Through her decades of service with the NYPD, she experienced the full impact of the major events of her time, not merely as a witness to history, but as a participant right at the center of the action. And woven throughout her 20th century experiences, she lived her police officer's oath, the need to protect the vulnerable and innocent, juxtaposed against the concurrent growth of crime and the burgeoning presence of law enforcement. The NYPD needed talented women more than they knew. The vulnerable and the victims needed female officers too. The criminal element perhaps didn't need police women digging into their business, but once that happened, they quickly learned to respect what women brought to law enforcement. The 3 I's were inseparable: insight, investigative ability, and instinct. Mae and her cohort of female officers had those talents in abundance. Succeeding generations would rely on them as well, sometimes covertly or as a background skill, but always with strategic purpose. They got results. Her friends were Broadway stars and playwrights, judges, and politicians. Film star Rita Hayworth often babysat for her young grandsons. She saved up for her infrequent vacations and used them to transport herself into another world. She loved to travel, living the dream in first class on many an international cruise, and found her way around the world more than once. From riding camels to dodging communist customs agents, Mae was always up for adventure and a good time. She was a policewoman, a detective, a crime solver, a meticulous investigator, a wife, and a mother. Widowed at a young age, she raised 2 daughters while working long hours in shift work, nights and weekends. She did it all at a time when that having it all fullness of experience just wasn't done, much less even considered an option. She never considered she couldn't have what she wanted, be what she wanted. She just decided she would, and she did. And she played it all off, even well into retirement. At age 74, Queen's most famous pistol-packing mama was modest about her career achievements. I was a bit of a tough egg in those days," she'd say, waving a hand. "I knew how to handle a gun." But finding the details of her story, as well as those of her contemporaries and peers, wasn't easy. There is little written about women in the NYPD in the early 20th century, and records are difficult to locate, if they exist at all. In a New York Public Library blog article, Andy McCarthy commented, "For the 5 boroughs, there really is no collection of historical police records." He suggests that prior to 1930, any smattering that was kept and saved resembles a hail of rocks launched from a Bowery window during the 1857 Dead Rabbits riot. While this obscure reference seemed odd to me, I quickly learned the facts. There are no NYPD personnel records prior to 1930. What little information exists is available in fits and starts, indeed scattered across the city's various libraries and other records holdings areas. The department doesn't have a historian. It doesn't provide access to its historical photos. The New York City Police Museum closed in 2019. It was time to look elsewhere for resources and support. I found numerous books, articles, and blogs on law enforcement typically included only mere snippets of facts or brief references about women's contributions to policing. Many barely mentioned the women who served. Some citations omitted the female officers altogether, focusing instead on major crimes, show trials, and the personalities of criminals and politicians. But for fresh insights, there are the newspapers of the day. With all their faults, inaccuracies, politics, attitudes, and gossipy opinions, they still provide incredible insight into the life and times of Mae Foley, her cohort of fellow policewomen, her contemporaries, and all those who followed in their footsteps. Those times evolved in New York and her NYPD throughout the 20th century in the technologies and application of police science, if not in culture. By the time Mae retired in 1945, women comprised about 12% of the NYPD. Across the country, this was an average statistic. Typical stereotypes about women in male-dominated industries continue, refusing to let go, particularly in the realm of traditionally macho professions, such as the military and law enforcement. According to a recent article in Police Chief magazine, while the research confirms not only the need but the benefit of more women in policing, the numbers are not increasing. This may be due to an unwelcoming culture within many police organizations, the article states. Ongoing stereotypes create formidable barriers for female applicants and women navigating the profession. By 2019, the number of women serving in the NYPD had increased to only about 18%. About 6,570 women in the 36,500-member force. They included 781 detectives, 753 sergeants, and 200 lieutenants. One of those detectives had moved on to serve as the chief of detectives in Nassau County, New York. In 2022, she returned to New York's finest. On January 1st, 2022, Keishant Sewell made history when she was sworn in as the city's 45th police commissioner and the first woman to hold the post. In an interview after her appointment, Commissioner Sewell said, "I grew up in Queens. This is my city, and now, this being my department, I feel like I've come full circle." The Girls Who Fought Crime takes us back to the beginning of these linked circles. This is Mae Foley's journey, a tale that takes us from the age of corsets to crime fighting and the love of a city she knew could never sleep. This is the chronicle of one courageous woman's legendary dedication to public service and her fight to find a way into service that matters. I was advised against writing this story. No one wants to read about police these days, I heard. Like so many things in America these days, the topic of policing has become politicized and polemicized. However, the stories of our first policewomen are important for the exact reason I was being told they weren't worth telling. Police women have been shown to help decrease violence and the abuse of power that so many now associate with the sight of an officer with a badge and gun. So we can't turn away from our police women, especially now. A number of police departments are calling for more women to serve, seeing their involvement as integral to reducing police misconduct and the use of force. Perhaps this harkens back to Mae's time and the policewoman's original tie to the notion of social work extending into law enforcement, serving for the public good, truly to protect and defend. A 2021 study by researchers from 4 universities found that female officers made 7% fewer arrests than their male counterparts, while using force 28% less often. Just like in Mae's time, the data shows us that female officers are typically more educated than their male counterparts, more likely to engender a perception of fairness and equal treatment in their communities, and more likely to express empathy and engage with victims and suspects both as people first. Thus, this is the quintessential American tale, not a tragedy, but a drama, full of hopes and dreams, fights and dirty politics, scandal and violent crime. This is the story of women taking control back from powerful men and using it for not just their own good, but for the good of those around them, for their communities and society. But it is also a story of how one woman succeeded, despite the odds, at a time when success wasn't only considered impossible, but when those who applied and tried were often scorned. She not only saw it all, she did it all, and fully understood why and how she was needed. Like many of her trailblazing contemporaries, she did it at a time when her ambition and courage made her stand out. Her lessons are fresh for us today. Chapter 1. Born Lucky, Growing Up Tough. I just need to check you now for any weapons. Stand here with your arms outstretched. I'm going to pat you down. It'll only take a moment.
You bitch!
Detective Mae Foley thought she'd seen it all in her 27 long years with New York City's finest. Then, when she least expected it, one loud and volatile woman who'd just been arrested turned on her right there in the station house and proceeded to kick, punch, and headbutt like a prizefighter defending her title belt. Mae needed to examine the prisoner, make sure she wasn't hiding a weapon. But with an unholy shriek, the woman turned into a real contender and proceeded to pummel Mae with everything she had. Taken by surprise, Mae hit back, but even with all her skill, strength, and training, she took some serious blows in the process. After she won the fight, in a mere 3 rounds by her count, Mae limped into the ladies' lounge, sucked in a deep breath, and took stock in the mirror. Bruised ribs, maybe broken, a black eye, throbbing head, skinned knees and knuckles. Right then she knew it was time to make the big decision. She looked in the mirror and told herself, "Enough is enough, and at 57 you aren't getting any younger." Of course, once she said that, she still had to wonder if she would actually listen. By the fall of 1945, she'd lived an incredible and exciting career, but a dangerous one, too. She was a minority, a woman in a typically male role, a career police officer, a detective, an undercover agent, and sometimes a spy. All those roles at a time when any one of them would be considered unconventional in society. She was also a wife, mother, widow, grandmother, and world traveler. Mae found her way in the world and blazed her own trail. She never looked back, Now she had a choice to make. She'd tried to wink at herself in the mirror, but her swollen eyes wouldn't cooperate. Mae spent a few days at home, nursing her injuries and her wounded pride, but she already knew what she had to do next. While brutal, this most recent incident that led Mae to make the big decision to turn in her badge wasn't the first time she had had a run-in with a prisoner who turned violent. Throughout her career, she'd been shot at, held up, beaten, even used as bait. Mae was tough. More than once, she caught herself thinking that she was done for, but she always came through. Born on July 14, 1886, to French and Irish parents Robert and Mary Ann Vermel, Mae was baptized just days later at the Immaculate Conception Church, her parents and neighbor and now godmother, Mrs. Bridget McCloskey, in attendance. She grew up playing in the grubby streets of the Gas House district, just north of New York's Lower East Side, in the heart of an Irish Catholic immigrant community. Mae was the oldest, and she would say the smartest of 3 children. Her brother Robert was 5 years younger than she was, and her sister Selma 9. The Gas House district was in the part of Manhattan dominated by giant gas storage tanks and rival gas companies. Located just north of the neighborhoods known today as Peter Cooper Village and Stuyvesant Town, the Gas House district was a relatively poor section, comprised of fluctuating immigrant populations, Jewish, German, Irish, Russian, and French. Irish immigrants flowed into New York in the early 19th century, increasing more than 6 times over by the 1830s. Immigrant neighborhoods were crowded with the poor who moved upward and onward as soon as they were able. The competition for space, control, and leverage was intense. The rise of ethnic gangs began in this swirling melting pot, and crime rose along with them. Then the night grew brighter. By the time Mae was born, electrical lighting was becoming increasingly popular in homes, and the gas companies that were located in the district no longer had a monopoly on providing gas for light, focusing instead on sales for cooking and heat. Methods and means of policing this morass were still being developed. Women's role? Initially none, but eventually something had to be done to care for the young women who were at-risk victims and often criminals themselves. Mae was 2 years old when the city hired its first female employees. The New York City Police Department, recently dubbed the finest, hired 4 women who were assigned as precinct matrons. Although they weren't considered to be officially in the ranks, matrons were required to take the city's civil service exam, proving they were both mentally and physically capable of doing the job. Some of the matrons served in jails, while others performed social work roles, expanding the accepted social practice of wife-mother-caregiver to broader custodial care, taking care of abandoned babies and lost children, and supporting runaway girls, young women forced into prostitution, or even petty thieves and pickpockets, plus the female prisoners. Of course, those who served in jails had the worst jobs, scrubbing out the cells after drunks and thieves had vacated them, leaving their litter and often a variety of bodily fluids behind. Plus, they were charged with keeping other areas of the police station clean. It was dirty work, and often thankless. The officers weren't known for being the tidiest of men. Or the nicest. It took another year before women were considered official members of the force. It was a grudging acceptance, and true acceptance of women on the force took much longer. Years longer, decades longer, maybe even a century. In the meantime, New York was a crowded, crime-ridden and exciting hot mess. It was rife with competing factions, gangs, criminals, and politicians, all scuffling for a toehold on the ladder of success, celebrity, or even notoriety. It was a confusing mix of opportunity and danger that enticed runaways and opportunists, entrepreneurs, and masters of exploitation and trafficking, both in people and drugs. Mae lived in a part of the city that was terrorized by street criminals, not just the Gas House Gang, but also the Pug Uglies and the infamous Bowery Boys. Many gangs hailed from the slum area known as 5 Points, south of Chinatown. While this area was south of the Gas House district, many gangs traversed large segments of the city. The majority of these gangs originated in the 19th century, including the Bowery Boys, the Shirt Tails, and the 40 Thieves. Poor, violent, and dressed to kill, the Bowery Boys were known for their religious and political ambitions. They often clashed with Irish Catholic gangs and focused on campaigning for limits on immigration. The Gas House Gang was one well known in Mae's neighborhood. This gang's specialty was armed robbery, often committing between 30 and 40 attacks a night. But there were literally hundreds of gangs in New York at the turn of the century. The Italian and Russian mafias, the Irish mob, the Jewish-American gangs, plus Black, Spanish-speaking, and Chinese gangs. Not surprisingly, Mae witnessed fights, assaults, thefts, and more on a daily basis. A few times, the wild boys from her parochial school tried to trip her up on her way to class 1 block over. It was just boys being boys, especially when the nuns weren't looking. One day, she saw them coming straight down the street toward her. It was her brother Robert's first year in school, and she would walk him over to the schoolyard before continuing on to the girls' school a couple of blocks over.
"Hey, Mae, you want to buy a stick of gum?"
"Ha! Not from the likes of yous!" Mae knew that was how the boys got close to their marks. One distracted the victim by badgering him or her to buy gum, while others picked pockets or ran off with purses. And just for fun, they enjoyed harassing any younger girls they could find. This neighbor boy, a couple of years older than 11-year-old Mae, wasn't going to pull such an obvious ploy on her.
"Oh, yeah?"
His mouth turned down, and Mae heard another boy run up behind her, his cheap shoes flapping, the sole coming loose. The others across the street began cheering him on. Mae whispered to her brother, "Don't move, Bobby, just step back." Wide-eyed, the little boy moved off the sidewalk. Mae knew he was shy and slow to make friends in his class. Bobby didn't need to feel bullied by the older boys. She shot him a glance, finger to her lips. "Shh." Mae checked the boy's location out of the corner of her eye. When the shoe flapper was almost close enough to push the schoolbooks out from under her arm, she turned and clipped the little blonde monster right on his ear. He fell hard on the sooty sidewalk, bouncing up on his rear.
"Ow!" He grabbed his head. "You can't do that!"
She could see tears in his eyes. Bobby started to laugh, then clapped a hand over his mouth. Mae shushed him again. No need to shame the kid further. The little monster must have heard the laugh, though. His face turned as red as a rotten tomato. He started to sputter, but Mae interrupted him, her foot on his big toe sticking out from the rotten shoe.
"You ever come near me or my brother again, and I'll do you worse than that," Mae promised. "Who do you think you are? You ain't no cop. You're just a girl."
The boy struggled to get up, still clutching his bent ear. His friends were watching.
"I will be. One of these days, I will be a cop, and I'll put you and your stupid little friends in jail. Now run on home to your mama."
Mae turned and walked away. Bobby stepped up and grabbed Mae's hand. She was already his hero. Those boys from St. Gabriel's Boys' School around the block never bothered her again. But Mae kept watch. Much of daily life in the gas-house district took place in the streets, and from the front steps of her tenement.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?